He was just a waiter. That a simple waiter could reach the heart of an autistic girl where fortunes spent on renowned specialists had failed seems unlikely, doesn't it? But what happened at that discreet table amid the luxury of one of Boston's most sophisticated restaurants forever changed the life of a millionaire mother on the brink of despair, of a child trapped in his own silent world, and of an ordinary man with an extraordinary gift that no one there could have foreseen. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The air inside Aveline, in the heart of Boston's Back Bay, was a carefully orchestrated composition of success and discretion. Conversation was a velvety murmur, low enough not to be disturbing, but present enough to fill the space with an energy of importance. The clink of silverware against fine china was the delicate percussion to this symphony, a sound that spoke of leisurely dining and business deals closed with a handshake. Amber lighting from brushed brass sconces bathed the pristine white tablecloths in a warm glow, making each cut crystal glass sparkle like a diamond. The waiters moved with a quiet, almost choreographed efficiency, their navy blue vests impeccable and their neutral expressions an integral part of the decor. It was a place where everything was controlled, predictable, and designed to exude luxurious comfort. Every detail, from the weight of the silverware to the way the napkin was folded, communicated a standard of excellence that customers not only expected, but demanded. It was the kind of place where chaos had no place, where emotions were kept under control, and where any deviation from the norm was instantly noticed by everyone. But at one of the more secluded tables, near a window that overlooked Newbury Street, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Here, a palpable tension hung over the table, thick and uncomfortable, like the heavy air before a storm. Eleanor Sinclair, a figure whose presence normally commanded quiet respect in Boston's wealthiest circles, felt the weight of this tension like a physical cloak. Her royal blue silk dress was from the latest collection. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a low, elegant bun, and a string of discreet pearls adorned her neck. To the casual observer, she was the epitome of elegance and control. But a closer look would reveal the fine lines of anguish around her lips and the strain in her shoulders to maintain a relaxed posture. Every fiber of her being was focused on the small figure seated across from her, her impeccable composure of fragile armor, struggling to hide the exhaustion and despair that clouded her gaze. She felt the gazes of the other customers, even if they were disguised as casual curiosity, and each glance was like a small needle piercing her facade of normality. In front of her, her 7-year-old daughter Lily seemed to exist in a completely separate universe. With her light brown hair tied back with a velvet ribbon and her large blue eyes fixed on an indefinite point in space, the little girl was oblivious to everything and everyone. She didn't notice the food, her mother, or the luxurious surroundings that surrounded her. She was immersed in a private world, protected by a wall of silence that no one had been able to break through until then. Her stillness was almost absolute, except for a subtle, repetitive movement. Her small, delicate, pale fingers drummed softly on the tablecloth, tracing a rhythm that only she understood. It was a constant, methodical movement that seemed to be her only form of communication with the outside world, a code that no one there could decipher. The absence in her gaze was not of emptiness, but of a deep concentration on something internal, something much more captivating and real to her than the fancy restaurant or her mother's growing anguish. Her small figure in her Sunday dress looked fragile, but the strength of her seclusion was unshakable. The untouched plate in front of Lily was a childlike work of culinary art, a silent testament to the futile efforts of her mother and the restaurant staff. The chef had created a colorful landscape, a mound of creamy mashed potatoes like a cloud, steamed broccoli arranged like tiny trees, and pieces of grilled chicken cut into star shapes. It was vibrant, carefully assembled and visually appealing, designed specifically to try to pique the interest of any child. Yet to Eleanor, the plate seemed to mock her. Every vibrant color, every playful shape accentuated the depth of her daughter's disconnect. It was a monument to her failure, an expensive and beautifully presented reminder that despite all her resources and influence, she could not accomplish the most fundamental task of a mother: to nurture her child. Food, which should be a source of life and pleasure, became a silent battlefield, and the beauty of the plate only made Eleanor's defeat more bitter and visible for all to see. The plate remained there, slowly cooling, as a symbol of the hope that was also fading. From a measured distance, near a service station where he polished silverware, Liam watched the scene. At 28, he was one of the most experienced waiters at Aveline, known for his calm and efficiency. But while his colleagues saw Eleanor's table as nothing more than an inconvenience, a spoiled child, and an impatient mother, Liam saw something else entirely. His heart sank with an aching familiarity, a resonance that transported him instantly to his own story, to the countless challenges he had faced alongside his younger sister, Sophie. He recognized every detail of that silent drama: the look of restrained despair on his mother's face, the way the child closed herself off from an overwhelming sensory world, and the repetitive rhythm of her fingers, not a sign of disobedience, but an attempt at self-regulation. He didn't see a tantrum, he saw a struggle. And Eleanor's anguish was almost a character in itself at the table, an invisible presence he felt in his own chest, a heavy energy that called to him, daring him to ignore the chasm between his professional duty and the human need to intervene. For Eleanor, the Aveline, with its luxury and select clientele, represented yet another stage for her personal failure. Every silver cutlery, every starched linen napkin seemed to accentuate the distance between the life she showed the world and the harsh reality she faced behind closed doors. She had consulted the most renowned specialists from Boston to New York, visited international clinics in Switzerland, invested fortunes in innovative therapies and experimental treatments, all in the hope of finding a crack, however small, in the wall of silence that surrounded Lily. Nothing had consistently worked. The accumulated frustration sometimes turned into a palpable despair, a sense of helplessness that eroded her strength and sapped her hope. And there, in this restaurant where she was expected to maintain her usual composure and elegance, little Lily, with her silent refusal to eat or communicate, exposed her mother's vulnerability in a relentless way. Every minute she spent with her plate untouched was public proof of her inability to reach her own daughter, an open wound for all curious eyes to see. The rhythm of Lily's fingers on the towel was not random, and Liam knew it. To others, it might have seemed like a nervous, meaningless gesture, but he saw a pattern, a repeating sequence, a small ritual that brought her comfort and security in an environment that to her was probably a barrage of stimuli. The hum of conversation, the glow of the lights, the complex smells of food, the touch of clothing on her skin. It could all be overwhelming. The drumming was her anchor, her way of organizing an internal universe that operated by its own rules, often incomprehensible to outsiders. Liam, molded by years of watching Sophie, had developed an almost microscopic patience for deciphering these codes. He knew that Lily's behavior was not a challenge, but a form of self-defense. Behind those distant eyes lay a brilliant intelligence and a keen sensitivity that protected itself from the chaos outside through isolation. That rhythm was her language, and any attempt at interaction that did not respect that language was doomed to failure from the start. The other waiters, younger and less experienced, whispered to each other, stealing awkward glances toward Eleanor's table. They could not comprehend the depth of the drama unfolding before them. In their minds, the situation was simple. A spoiled rich kid was making a scene, and her mother was helpless to control her. They saw the privilege, but not the pain. They felt uncomfortable, not out of empathy, but because the tension at that table disturbed the superficial harmony of the environment they were paid to maintain. Social etiquette prevented them from observing more directly, but their curiosity was almost impossible to ignore. To them, Lily was an oddity, an anomaly in the smooth running of the restaurant. The complexity of autism and the silent suffering that afflicted this family were completely beyond their comprehension. Only Liam, with his lifelong knowledge, could see through the surface and feel the weight of this lonely struggle. He saw a mirror of his own family, only with more money and less understanding. Liam's inner conflict became almost physical, a pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. On one side was his professionalism, the unspoken rule never to pry into a client's personal life, especially one as influential as Eleanor Sinclair. An inappropriate intervention could cost him his job, a job he desperately needed to support his family and supplement Sophie's care costs. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. On the other side was a compelling need to help, a pull that came from a place of deep empathy. Lily's disconnection rang in his chest like a calling he struggled to ignore. He knew what it was like to feel helpless. He saw his own mother's reflection in Eleanor, and he saw Sophie's loneliness in Lily. Letting this family wallow in their silent despair felt like a betrayal of everything he had learned. The fear of being fired was real, but the possibility of offering a moment of relief, a glimmer of hope, seemed increasingly important. This realization brought Liam a painful and liberating clarity. Money and power were useless in the face of certain barriers. Human connection, he realized, was the most valuable and often the most scarce currency. He felt a responsibility growing within him, an urgency to share what little he knew, the knowledge he had gained not from books or seminars, but from everyday life, from love, and from watching his sister closely. He remembered a phrase his grandmother had used to say, "A simple woman, but one of profound wisdom. The worst defeat is the one that happens when we don't even try to fight." The image of Sophie, smiling in a rare moment of connection, flashed through his mind, giving him the courage he had been lacking. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs with new determination. The risk of the job seemed to pale in comparison to the possibility of making a real difference. It was now or never. He had to find an opportunity, a subtle way to reach out without seeming intrusive or disrespectful. The opportunity came as a pause in the restaurant's music. The waiter, originally assigned to Eleanor's table, approached, hesitated for a moment, and then stepped back, visibly intimidated by the aura of failure that emanated from the scene. He didn't know whether to remove Lily's untouched plate or wait for further instructions that never came. It was that split second of indecision that served as Liam's signal. He straightened his back, adjusted the knot of his bow tie with a quick, deliberate gesture, and with a calmness that surprised even himself, began walking toward Eleanor Sinclair's table. Each step was measured, deliberate, as if he were crossing a minefield where any false move could have disastrous consequences. There was no arrogance in his posture, only a quiet seriousness and genuine empathy that radiated from his gaze. He had no elaborate plan, no magic formula learned from manuals. He brought with him only his experience, his intuition, and the deep conviction that all children, no matter how distant they may seem, want to be understood and loved. As he approached, he felt the curious glances of some customers on him and the increased attention of the maitre d', who would undoubtedly find such an unexpected initiative on the part of a waiter strange. But Liam kept his gaze fixed on Lily, on the small figure curled up in the chair, rocking gently with her gaze lost in a point beyond the palpable reality of the restaurant. He knew that the first few seconds would be crucial. He needed to convey security, calm, and above all, respect for the girl's space. His heart beat a little faster, not out of fear, but out of hopeful anticipation and the awareness of the importance of that moment that was unfolding. He was not just approaching a table, he was trying to reach a soul that everyone else had considered unreachable. The weight of that self-imposed responsibility was immense, but the image of his sister Sophie gave him the strength to continue, step by step, towards the unknown. When he reached the edge of the table, Liam did not immediately address Eleanor, nor did he attempt to make direct eye contact with Lily. Instead, with almost imperceptible subtlety, he slowly knelt down beside her chair. It was a fluid, unhurried movement that brought him slightly below her eye level, a technique he had learned to be less intimidating to sensitive children. He remained there for a few moments in silence, simply breathing calmly and rhythmically, allowing his presence to become part of Lily's environment without being intrusive. He did not extend a hand, make any sudden gestures, or utter a single word. His body was relaxed, his shoulders slightly hunched, sending a non-verbal message of calm and respect. He knew from experience with Sophie that any hasty or eager approach could close the doors of communication even further. The goal was not to elicit a response, but to create a safe space, a bubble of calm amidst the noise and bustle of the restaurant. Eleanor, initially surprised by the waiter's unexpected arrival, watched the scene with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity that she could barely conceal. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were going to say something, perhaps to send him away or ask what he was doing. Years of interactions with specialists had conditioned her to expect protocols, direct questions, and assessments. What this man was doing was unprecedented. No therapist, no matter how expensive, had ever knelt silently beside her daughter in such a way. Some unknown force made her quiet, made her simply watch this man kneel, acting in a way that defied all her experience. There was an authenticity in his gesture, a humility that disarmed her. She saw a respect for Lily's individuality that she had rarely witnessed, and against her own disbelief, she allowed this strange, silent moment to continue, clinging to it as the last and most unlikely of hopes. Liam focused his attention not on Lily's face, but on the rhythmic movement of her little fingers on the towel, the same drumming he had observed from afar. It was there, in that small, repetitive gesture, that he would seek the first point of contact, the first syllable of a non-verbal dialogue. With the delicacy of someone handling a fragile relic, Liam began to subtly imitate the movement of Lily's fingers with his own hand, which rested discreetly on his knee. It was not an exact imitation, but a kind of echo, a gentle accompaniment to the rhythm she established. He did not look at the girl as he did this. He kept his gaze lowered, fixed on his own hands, as if he too were absorbed in a private ritual. The idea was not to copy in order to mock or to draw attention in an ostentatious way, but to create a resonance, a sense of familiarity and mirroring that could perhaps penetrate Lily's barrier of isolation. He was offering a form of communication on her terms, validating her rhythm as a legitimate language. The noise of the Aveline, with the clinking of cutlery and the flowing conversations, continued around them, but at Eleanor's table, a universe of its own had formed. That little ballet of fingers between the waiter and the girl created a silence charged with meaning. From the outside, nothing seemed to be happening, but there, in that bubble of interaction, a bridge was being built, brick by brick. Eleanor held her breath, her eyes fixed on the unusual scene. Accustomed to direct interventions, incisive questions, and attempts at verbal interaction, she had never seen anyone try to communicate with Lily in that way, so indirectly, so respectfully of the girl's inner world. A small flame of something she dared not name began to burn in her chest, still weak, still fragile, but undeniably present. She realized that she was not witnessing a technique, but an act of pure empathy, a genuine attempt to see the world through her daughter's eyes, and this realization moved her deeply. And then something almost imperceptible happened. The drumming of Lily's fingers, which had seemed random and constant until then, faltered for a split second. It was just a small pause, a hiccup in the steady rhythm. To Eleanor or any other observer, it would have gone completely unnoticed. But to Liam, it was like thunder in a blue sky. He didn't alter his own movement, showed no visible reaction to that small change, but his heart skipped a beat. Was it a coincidence? Or had Lily somehow sensed the resonance he was trying to create? He knew he couldn't rush it. Any sign of excitement or overt anticipation might startle her, make her close in on herself even more. He continued his fluid, steady movement like a rock in the middle of a stream, waiting, watching with all his senses, feeling the electricity of that first tiny response. Eleanor, for her part, did not notice the hesitation. For her, nothing had changed. Her daughter stood there, oblivious, and the waiter continued his strange, silent ritual. The impatience, a feeling so familiar to her, began to bubble up again. How long would this last? What did he hope to achieve with this? A part of her wanted to interrupt, to say that she had tried everything and that this was just another waste of time. But the memory of the countless previous failures kept her paralyzed. The memory of the experts' faces, their complex theories, and their disappointing results made her remain silent. This, as strange as it seemed, was unlike anything she had ever tried. The man's monk-like patience, his unshakable calm, was so at odds with her own anxiety that she felt compelled to wait, to give this moment, however unlikely, a chance to unfold to its end. Liam, certain that Lily's slight pause had been real, and, more importantly, had not been followed by an increase in agitation, knew this was a good sign. It meant that his presence and actions were not being perceived as a threat. Slowly, ever so slowly, he began to introduce a small variation in his own movement, a small, intentional pause, a slightly longer touch on the knee, almost as if he were testing the waters, inviting Lily to a subtle dance. He wasn't expecting an immediate response, or even a conscious one. He was simply trying to create a small disruption in the pattern, something that would pique her curiosity, a small deviation from the sensory routine that had held her captive. It was a calculated risk. He was changing the song they had been silently sharing, waiting to see if she would notice the change in melody and perhaps respond to it. And then it happened again. This time, Lily's response was a little clearer, though still incredibly subtle to the less observant observer. After Liam's slight variation in rhythm, the drumming of Lily's fingers ceased completely for nearly 3 seconds. Her fingers remained still on the linen tablecloth. Liam, though he wasn't looking at her directly, felt rather than saw her head tilt slightly, almost as if she were trying to process new sensory information, to locate the source of that small change in pattern. To Eleanor, who had been following each movement with increasing intensity, the pause seemed like an ominous sign, perhaps the prelude to further irritation or disengagement, but Liam felt a rush of heat run through his body. The pause wasn't rejection, it was attention. Lily had noticed the change, and her brain was working to decipher it. He had succeeded. He had, for a brief moment, captured her attention. Liam remained calm, continuing his new rhythmic pattern, now with the pause incorporated, as if it were the new rhythm of the silent music they shared. He didn't try to fill her silence with expansive words or gestures. He simply waited, offering his steady presence and predictable rhythm as an anchor in a sea of confusing stimuli. This moment for Liam was worth more than all the words of encouragement or all the promises of success he had heard from his sister's experts. It was the language of the soul, pure and simple, a communication that transcended logic and entered the realm of pure sensation and trust. He knew that the most important thing to do now was to hold that safe space, not to force the next step, but to allow Lily to guide him, to set the pace of her own opening. His patience was a silent promise that he would not abandon her or rush her. And then Lily's fingers began to move again, but this time the rhythm was different. Subtly, almost by accident, she seemed to incorporate the small pause Liam had introduced. It wasn't a perfect imitation, but there was a clear correspondence, a kind of answer to his silent question. Liam's heart raced, and a deep, Restrained joy filled him. It was the beginning of a dialogue, the first exchange of a conversation that transcended words. He felt a shiver run down his spine, the same sensation he felt when Sophie, after days of silence, finally looked into his eyes or allowed him to touch her hand. They were small victories, but they had the weight of monumental achievements. With the utmost care, Liam continued the rhythmic game, now following Lily's example, mirroring the variation she had introduced, transforming the interaction into a delicate, collaborative dance. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. This helps a lot for those of us who are just starting out and continuing. This time, the change was clear enough for Eleanor to see. She saw the pause in her daughter's fingers, the way they seemed to respond, however enigmatically, to the waiter's movements. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it, projecting her own desperate hopes onto the scene. But no, it was real. There was a pattern, a shift. For the first time in months, maybe years, she saw a ray of light in the darkness that enveloped Lily. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she held them back, terrified that any sudden movement, any audible sob, would break the spell of this sacred moment. She stood perfectly still, barely breathing, a statue of fragile, fearful hope, witnessing a form of communication she had never known was possible, feeling the weight of years of frustration begin to lift, inch by inch. The small, rhythmic interaction continued for a few more minutes, an ebb and flow of subtle movements between Liam and Lily. It was a delicate dance, an exchange of almost invisible signals, but charged with a growing complicity. Liam didn't try to rush things, didn't introduce new elements abruptly. He simply allowed himself to be present, accompanying the girl as she explored this new channel of communication. And little by little, he noticed that Lily's body seemed less tense. Her shoulders, previously hunched in a defensive posture, relaxed subtly. Her head, which had remained low and still, began to move a little more freely, although she still didn't make direct eye contact. They were small indications, but they signaled a lessening of anxiety, a gradual opening to the outside world. She was feeling safe enough to let her guard down a little. Liam felt it was time to take a step forward, but with the same caution and respect. He looked at the table, at Lily's untouched plate. The food, with its colors and shapes, seemed like a minefield, something that was probably associated with countless failed attempts and moments of stress. Introducing it now would be a mistake. It would reintroduce pressure and anxiety. He needed something neutral, something that didn't carry the weight of past expectations. He remembered how Sophie sometimes responded well to objects with specific textures or to small elements that could be manipulated. His gaze wandered, and his hand, still kneeling beside the girl, moved gently to the pocket of his apron, where he always carried a small object, a personal amulet, which he had also used many times to calm Sophie in moments of agitation. From his pocket, Liam slowly and carefully pulled out a small coffee spoon. It was no ordinary restaurant spoon, but an antique piece of slightly tarnished silver with a delicately carved handle and a smooth texture that was pleasant to the touch. It had belonged to his grandmother, and he had carried it with him as a memento. But he had also found that its lightness, its cool, smooth surface, and the small details on its handle had a calming effect on Sophie during her most difficult moments. The spoon was not just an object, it was a repository of memories of care and love. He held it in his hand for a moment, letting the amber light of the restaurant glow on its worn surface, before preparing for the next step of his delicate approach, hoping that this piece of his own history might offer Lily some comfort. He did not offer the spoon to Lily directly. Instead, he began to gently tap it against the wood of the chair where he was kneeling, producing a soft, rhythmic, metallic sound that was different from the sound of his fingers, but just as predictable and constant. He continued with the same rhythmic pattern that he and Lily had established with their fingers, only he transposed it to a new instrument, a new sound. The idea was to introduce a new sensory stimulus gradually, associating it with the safety and predictability of the interaction they had already established. He watched carefully for any sign of flinching or discomfort on Lily's part, ready to back off at the slightest hint that the novelty was too much. The sound was soft, almost like a small bell, and the rhythm was the anchor that connected this new experience to the previous one, creating a sensory bridge for her to explore. As the waiter took the spoon out of his pocket, a wave of skepticism washed over Eleanor. What was he up to with this? Was this just another useless trick? An attempt doomed to failure? So many experts, with their sophisticated equipment and complex theories, had achieved nothing. How could a simple waiter with an old spoon have any chance? For a moment, hopelessness threatened to overwhelm her again. But something in Liam's calm and confidence, in his way of understanding Lily's times and spaces, kept her from intervening. There was an authenticity in his gestures, a genuine empathy that she had rarely seen in the professionals she had hired. He was not following protocol, he was following his heart, and so she forced herself to remain still, to observe, to give this moment, however unlikely it seemed, the opportunity to unfold. Lily remained relatively calm, her body even less tense than before. Her fingers stopped drumming on the towel, and Liam felt that almost imperceptible tilt of her head again, a sign of curiosity and assimilation. She didn't flinch at the new sound, or show any signs of distress. Instead, she seemed to be listening, processing the new texture into her soundscape. Predictability of rhythm was key. The sound was new, but the pattern was familiar and safe. Liam continued the gentle rhythm with the spoon. He was in no hurry. He knew that trust is built with a lot of patience and perseverance. He wasn't trying to fix Lily or solve all her problems in a matter of minutes. He was simply trying to open a small window, a channel of communication, however narrow. Then, after what seemed like an eternity of suspended anticipation, Lily did something that left Eleanor's mouth open and made Liam's heart race with an almost painful joy. Slowly, very slowly, the girl's tiny hand, which had been lying motionless on the towel, began to move toward the sound. It was not a sudden or uncoordinated movement, but a tentative, exploratory gesture, as if guided by an invisible force. Her small, delicate fingers reached out and, with an almost palpable shyness, touched the spoon that Liam was holding. There was no eye contact. There were no words, just that subtle touch. The girl's soft skin against the cool metal of the spoon. But in that touch resided a universe of meaning. It was the first time in a long time that Lily had initiated voluntary physical contact with something new in her environment, especially something offered by a stranger. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. This helps a lot for those of us who are just starting out and continuing. Lily's touch on the spoon was as light as a moth's landing, but to Liam and Eleanor, it had the impact of an earthquake. Liam held his hand steady, perfectly still, allowing her to explore the object at her own pace and on her own terms. He made no attempt to hold her hand, made no sound of verbal encouragement that might break the delicate spell of the moment. He simply took a deep breath, controlling the wave of emotion that threatened to spill over and betray his outward calm. In that moment, he was not a waiter, but a guardian, protecting a fragile and sacred space of trust that had just been born. His stillness was a promise of safety, a silent assurance that he would do nothing to frighten her, that the control of this interaction belonged entirely to her. Every second that her hand remained in contact with the spoon was a victory against years of isolation. Lily's fingers glided over the smooth, cool surface of the metal, exploring its curves, feeling the texture of the carved handle. Her eyes, though not meeting Liam's, seemed less distant, more focused on the object that held their hands together. It was a purely tactile exploration, a form of knowledge that transcended verbal logic and delved into the world of pure sensation. Liam knew from Sophie that for many children on the autism spectrum, the sense of touch was a primary channel of learning and solace. His sister often found peace in manipulating fabrics of different textures or small objects with interesting shapes. The spoon, with its elaborate handle and specific weight, offered a wealth of sensory information that seemed to captivate Lily's attention, calming the rocking of her body almost completely, a sure sign that her anxiety had dissipated, replaced by cautious curiosity. Eleanor watched, transfixed, as the tears finally ran freely down her face, but she dared not wipe them away, fearing that the slightest noise, the slightest gesture, might break the spell. Her heart, oppressed by anguish and despair for so long, now beat with a force that was a mixture of disbelief and an overwhelming joy that left her breathless. Years of specialists, expensive therapies, and trips in search of miracle cures flashed through her mind, and nothing, absolutely nothing, had produced a result like this. Here was her daughter, the girl who lived in an impenetrable world, willingly touching a stranger's hand, exploring an object with a calmness she had rarely witnessed. A wave of immense gratitude began to flood her, a gratitude so deep it was almost painful, directed at this young waiter who had achieved the impossible. She looked at Liam, no longer with skepticism or distrust, but with reverent admiration, as if she were standing before a miracle personified. He didn't seem to notice her emotion. All his attention was focused on Lily, on her every breath, on her every subtle movement, guiding her with a delicacy and intuition that seemed almost supernatural. In that moment, Eleanor understood something fundamental. True wisdom did not always come with diplomas and titles, but often resided in lived experience, in genuine empathy, and in the ability to connect with others on a fundamental human level. That waiter, with his wisdom born of love for her sister, had taught her more in a few minutes than a legion of renowned professionals had in years. The humility of that lesson struck her with a transformative force. Liam felt the slight tremor in Lily's hand as she continued to explore the spoon. He held his steady, offering her a secure foothold. Then, with measured slowness, he began to move the spoon slightly, just a few millimeters up and down, side to side, introducing a new element of interaction. It was a subtle invitation for Lily to follow the movement, to transform her passive touch into a more active participation. He didn't force her, he simply suggested it, letting her decide whether or not to follow. To his surprise and delight, her fingers followed the gentle movement of the spoon, maintaining contact, adapting to the new dynamic. It was as if they were dancing a small, silent minuet, their hands joined by that small silver object, a dance of trust and connection. A genuine, spontaneous smile spread across Liam's lips, a smile that reflected the sheer joy of this moment of connection. He remembered how, with Sophie, small games like this, based on shared movement and sensory exploration, often paved the way for more complex interactions. Trust had to be built brick by brick, gesture by gesture. The noise of the restaurant seemed to have quieted, or perhaps it was just the intensity of his concentration that created that sense of isolation. The outside world, with its demands and distractions, had temporarily lost its importance. Here, kneeling on the cold floor of a luxury restaurant, Liam felt more fulfilled than at any other time in his professional life, immersed in an act of pure and simple human connection. The interaction with the spoon continued for a few more precious moments, a tactile dialogue that deepened with each passing second. Liam noticed that Lily's breathing had become more regular, calmer, and her gaze seemed more present. He knew this was a delicate moment, a window of opportunity that could close as quickly as it had opened. He needed to seize this connection, however fragile, to try to take the next step, a step that, for Eleanor, would be the ultimate proof of a miracle. eating. But how could he make this transition without breaking the spell, without reintroducing the anxiety and refusal that always accompanied attempts to feed her? He glanced discreetly at Lily's plate. The colorful vegetables and artfully arranged mashed potatoes seemed like an insurmountable mountain. Any direct attempt to bring that food to Lily's mouth would likely result in immediate rejection and the breaking of the trust he had worked so hard to build. He needed a bridge, something to connect the safety of his current interaction with the spoon to the novelty of food. His mind worked feverishly, searching his memories of Sophie for some clue, some strategy that could be adapted to this situation. Then a simple, intuitive idea occurred to him, based on the way he sometimes got Sophie to try new flavors. It wasn't about forcing her, but about making the food part of the game, an element of sensory exploration, just like the spoon. With the hand that wasn't holding the spoon, Liam, in an extremely slow and deliberate movement, reached for Eleanor's plate. His eyes met Eleanor's for a split second, a silent plea for reassurance, and he saw in her gaze a mixture of fear and hope that mirrored his own. Ignoring the fancy silverware of the restaurant, Liam used the tip of his index finger to scoop up a tiny, almost invisible dollop of mashed potatoes from Lily's plate. It was so small that it would barely be noticeable, but it carried an immense emotional weight. He didn't put his finger directly to Lily's mouth or even near her. Instead, with the same delicacy with which he handled the spoon, he deposited the small dollop of mashed potatoes on the convex part of the spoon that Lily was still touching, very close to her fingers, but without the food directly touching her skin. The food was now on the playing field, but as a shy guest, not an invader. The goal wasn't for her to eat it right away, but to familiarize herself with the presence of the food in a non-threatening way, associating it with the pleasant, safe, tactile sensation that the spoon provided. Lily, who was focused on the feel of the spoon in her fingers, didn't seem to notice the small addition right away. Her fingers continued to explore the metal surface. Liam stood still, holding his breath, watching her every micro-expression. He knew this was the most critical moment. If she perceived the puree as something strange or unwelcome, she might back away, and the entire connection they had built up to this point could crumble. But he also knew that curiosity, once aroused, could be a powerful force, and he was betting everything on that little flame he had worked so hard to ignite inside her. Slowly, Lily's fingers glided over the small portion of puree in their exploration. There was an almost imperceptible pause in her movements. Liam felt his heart stop for a moment. She had noticed. What would come next? Rejection? Fear? Years of experience had taught him to read the subtlest signs. A slight stiffening of a shoulder, a twitch in the corner of an eye, a change in the pattern of her breathing. He was prepared for a retreat, for the collapse of the fragile bridge he had so carefully built. He watched with such intense concentration that the rest of the world, the sounds of the restaurant, the other tables, everything had disappeared. There was only him, the girl, and that tiny drop of food that represented a universe of possibilities and risks. The tension in the air was almost solid, a suspended silence where the future of their interaction would be decided. To her immense surprise and relief, Lily did not withdraw her hand. Instead, her fingers paused for a second on the small mound of puree, and then, with hesitant curiosity, she seemed to press the food lightly against the spoon, feeling its soft, moist texture. There was no grimace, no sign of disgust or aversion. It was simply a silent, tactile exploration, the same as she had devoted to the spoon moments before. To her, the puree was not food, in the stressful sense of the word. It was simply a new texture to be discovered, introduced in a safe and controlled way. Doña Esperanza, who had been watching every detail with wide eyes, raised her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob of emotion. This was more than she had ever dared to dream. Lily's neutral, almost curious reaction was a victory in itself, a seismic shift from her previous automatic and adamant refusal. Seeing that tacit acceptance, Liam took the next step with the same infinite caution. With the spoon still in contact with her fingers, he began to move the object very slowly towards her face. He did not go directly to her mouth, a gesture that would be too invasive and could set off all of Lily's defense alarms. Instead, he aimed at a neutral zone near her chin, allowing the subtle aroma of the puree to reach her gradually. He followed every millimeter of the movement, carefully observing Lily's body language, ready to stop or retreat at the slightest sign of discomfort. His arm moved with the slowness of a growing branch, a natural, organic movement designed to be as non-threatening as possible. He was inviting her to experience the world with another sense, smell, before even considering taste. The girl did not flinch. Her body remained relaxed, and her eyes, though not fixed on the spoon, seemed to vaguely follow its movement. When the spoon was a few inches from her chin, Liam stopped. He did not attempt to introduce the food into her mouth. He simply held it there, motionless. He was letting Lily get used to the closeness, the smell, the idea. He remembered how, with Sophie, gradual approach was essential. Sometimes it would take days or weeks for her to accept a new food close to her face, and only then, much later, would one consider the possibility of her tasting it. But here, in that moment, time seemed to have sped up. The connection he had established with Lily seemed to have opened an unexpected path of trust. He sensed that she was receptive, that maybe, just maybe, she was willing to take the next step on her own. The silence around the table was so thick it felt palpable. Eleanor barely breathed, her eyes fixed on the spoon floating near her daughter's face. Each second dragged on like an hour. Liam, with a calm he was surprised he possessed, began to hum a very soft, almost inaudible melody. It was an old lullaby his grandmother used to sing to him and Sophie, a simple repetitive melody with a soothing rhythm that always soothed them. He didn't look at Lily as he sang. He kept his gaze down as if lost in his own memories. The song wasn't for Lily directly, but to create an even calmer and safer atmosphere, to fill the silence with something soft, predictable and loving, adding another layer of comfort to their delicate interaction. And then, the miracle happened. Spontaneously, without pressure or insistence from Liam, Lily tilted her head slightly forward, and with a delicate movement, her lips touched the small portion of puree on the spoon. It was not a bite, nor an attempt to swallow. It was just a brush, an oral exploration, as if she were tasting the world with the tip of her tongue, testing this new sensation in a safe way. Liam felt as if an electric current ran through his body. He stopped humming. The silence was suddenly filled with the enormity of the gesture. That small movement, so simple for any other child, was for Lily a giant leap across the chasm that separated her from the world, an act of trust and curiosity that flourished in the safe space Liam had created for her. After that first exploratory touch, Lily processed the sensation for a moment, her lips moving subtly, and then, without hesitation, she licked the small amount of food from the spoon. A collective sigh, a sound of pure relief, seemed to escape Eleanor and Liam at the same time. It was a tiny amount of food, almost insignificant in nutritional terms, but in terms of meaning, it was a feast. Lily had eaten, of her own free will. No crying, no tantrums, no refusal, just with a quiet curiosity and an acceptance that, minutes before, had seemed in the realm of the impossible. The barrier had been broken, not with force, but with the gentleness of an invitation that had finally been accepted. That small act had redefined everything. Liam felt his eyes burn, emotion finally breaking through his barriers of self-control. He didn't cry, but a lump formed in his throat, an overwhelming mix of joy, relief, and a deep sense of awe at the resilience and connection of the human spirit. All the hours of frustration with his own family, all the pain of watching his mother struggle, all the patience he had learned through Sophie, it all culminated in that moment. He hadn't just helped a little girl eat a crumb of mashed potatoes. He had witnessed the beauty of a soul opening up, and the gratitude for having been the catalyst for that moment was a feeling so powerful it left him humbled and speechless. Eleanor could no longer contain her emotion. A loud sob escaped her lips, followed by a convulsive cry, a cry that had carried years of anguish, frustration, and fear, but which was now washed away by a wave of indescribable relief and gratitude. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as tears ran through her fingers. They were not tears of sadness, but of a happiness so intense that it was almost unbearable. Her daughter, her little Lily, had taken a giant step, a step that rekindled all the hopes she had thought were lost forever. The sound of her crying was the sound of a dam breaking, releasing years of pent-up pain and letting in the light of a future she no longer dared to imagine. As Eleanor cried, Liam instinctively placed his free hand gently on Lily's shoulder. It was a light touch, one of reassurance and comfort. The little girl, seemingly oblivious to her mother's tears, remained calm, her lips still slightly damp from the puree. Liam's touch seemed to anchor her, as if to tell her that everything was okay, that she was safe. The atmosphere around the table, once charged with palpable tension, now seemed to vibrate with a different energy, an energy of raw emotion and quiet triumph over adversity. The rest of the restaurant continued on with its rhythm, oblivious to the drama and catharsis unfolding at that discreet table. But for those three, Julian, Lily, and Eleanor, the world had changed forever in that moment. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. This helps a lot for those of us who are just starting out and continuing. After the soft echo of Eleanor's cry, an emotional silence settled over the small bubble of intimacy that had formed around the table. Maria, who had licked the puree from the spoon, remained quiet, her lips still moving subtly, as if she were processing the new taste and texture. There were no grimaces or revulsion. On the contrary, Liam noticed an almost imperceptible glint in the girl's eyes, a spark that could be interpreted as interest, or perhaps simply the quiet acceptance of a new sensory experience that had not been unpleasant. He kept the hand with the spoon close by, but did not try to offer more immediately. He knew, instinctively and from his long experience with Sophie, that patience was essential at this moment. Any hasty movement, any show of eagerness to repeat the feat, could frighten her and make her retreat. He needed to give Maria time to process, assimilate, perhaps even request in her own way that the interaction continue. And then something extraordinary happened. Maria, with a slow, paused movement, turned her head slightly towards the spoon that Liam was still holding, and for the first time since he had approached, her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. It was a fleeting eye contact, almost accidental, but charged with an intensity that accelerated Liam's heart. In that brief moment of visual connection, he did not see the emptiness or the distance that many described. He saw an incipient curiosity, a presence that was there, waiting for the right invitation to emerge. That brief eye contact was the signal that Liam was waiting for, the tacit permission to continue. It was Lily's silent way of saying yes, an agreement that was worth more than 1,000 words and that confirmed that the trust between them was real. Taking that look as an invitation, Liam, even more slowly than before, scooped up another small portion of puree with the tip of his spoon, ensuring that the amount was equally small, not intimidating. This time, before bringing the spoon closer to Maria, he held it in her view for a few seconds, allowing her to observe the food, to familiarize herself with the idea of a new offering. His movements were fluid, almost choreographed, each gesture designed to convey calm and predictability. He didn't say a word, didn't make a sound of encouragement. The communication continued on the non-verbal plane, in the shared rhythm, in the trust that was being woven, thread by thread, between the two of them. He was reinforcing the safe pattern. First see, then smell, then maybe taste. As he slowly brought the spoon to Maria's face, she did not look away. Her eyes followed the path of the spoon, and as it approached her lips, she opened her mouth slightly, willingly, receptively. Liam felt a surge of silent triumph, a pure, untainted joy. With the same delicacy, he placed the small portion of puree on her tongue. Maria closed her mouth, and this time Liam could see the subtle movement of her throat as she swallowed. There was no hesitation, no resistance, just the simple, natural acceptance of food offered with respect and understanding. That second mouthful was confirmation, proof that the first had not been a fluke. A new door, previously firmly locked, was now opening. Eleanor, who had finally managed to control her intense crying, watched the scene through her still wet eyelashes, an expression of wonder and gratitude etched on her face. Every movement Liam made, every response Maria made, was a balm to her wounded soul. She watched her daughter accept her second helping of food and felt as if a huge weight she had carried for years was being gently lifted from her shoulders. Hope, which had once been a flickering and distant flame, now burned bright and strong in her chest. She looked at Liam, that young waiter, who with his seemingly infinite sensitivity and patience had achieved what no one else had. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the connection, about the way he had entered Maria's world, not to change her, but to meet her where she was. Liam, sensing that Maria might be reaching her limit of acceptance for now, began to slow down. He offered a third and fourth bite, each time tiny, and after Maria accepted them, he didn't try to offer more. Instead, he kept the spoon close by but returned to the gentle rhythm of his own breathing, allowing the interaction to end naturally and unhurriedly. He didn't want Maria to associate this positive experience with any kind of pressure to eat more than she was comfortable with. The goal wasn't to fill her stomach, but to open her heart and mind to the possibility of a safe and pleasurable eating interaction. He noticed that Maria's shoulders remained relaxed, and that the slight, anxious swaying from before hadn't returned. For Liam, this was the real victory. Finally, with a slow, gentle movement, Liam placed the small silver spoon on the table next to Maria's plate. He didn't immediately put it in his pocket, as if to leave a symbol of their interaction there. Then he turned a little closer to Eleanor, meeting her gaze, which was now clear, though still filled with deep emotion. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered at first. She cleared her throat discreetly and tried again, in a whisper filled with an intensity that filled the space between them. I don't know how to thank you." Her voice was shaky, but firm in its sincerity. It was the voice of a deeply grateful mother. Liam simply nodded. "Your daughter is a very special girl," he replied, his voice still low and respectful. "She just needed someone to understand her rhythm." "How?" Eleanor asked, the need to understand the source of that skill almost palpable in her tone. "How did you learn to understand that rhythm?" She wasn't questioning his credentials. She was humbly seeking the key to that mystery. Liam hesitated for a moment, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to find the right words. He glanced briefly at Maria, who remained calm. "I have a sister, Eleanor," he began, using her first name naturally, breaking the formal barrier between them. "A very dear sister named Sophie. She also has her own rhythm, her own way of seeing and feeling the world. It was from her that I learned that the most important thing is not to force, but to observe. It is not to speak, but to listen, even when silence seems to be the only answer." Liam's words, filled with real experience and palpable love, moved Eleanor as no book or lecture ever had. She understood that his skill was not a technique, but a wisdom forged in brotherly love. Driven by an impulse, a need to hold on to that hope, she opened her purse, took out a business card and a pen, and on the back wrote her personal phone number. I need to talk to you more, she said, her voice firm with new determination. About your sister, about how you do this. Please call me when you can. She handed him the card, not as an employer, but as someone seeking guidance, a ray of hope. Liam took the card, sensing the sincerity of the request, and tucked it carefully into his pocket. I would be honored, he replied. Before he walked away, Liam allowed himself one last look at Maria. She had picked up the silver spoon he had left on the table and was examining it with quiet curiosity. Her eyes met his once more, and in that brief contact Liam saw something that filled him with even greater hope, a glimmer of recognition, almost a silent thank you. He nodded slightly to Eleanor and, with discreet steps, walked away from the table, reintegrating himself into the routine of the restaurant. Eleanor watched him go, then looked at her daughter, who was now holding the spoon like a treasure. For the first time in years, a genuine smile, without a trace of sadness or worry, lit up Eleanor's face. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt that she was no longer alone in this journey. He didn't seek applause. He simply extended his heart and ended up giving a little girl the opportunity to connect with the world, and a mother the hope that money couldn't buy. Often, when paths seem closed and experts seem powerless, it is in the simplicity of a careful look and the courage of a gesture of pure empathy that we find the deepest answers. Life can present us with challenges that seem insurmountable, but it is in these moments that the true power of human connection is revealed, demonstrating that understanding the rhythm of another can change everything, rekindling the light where before there was only shadows. If the journey of Liam, Lily, and Eleanor touched your heart and reminded you of the beauty of simply seeing and welcoming others in their essence, subscribe to the channel for more stories that move us and inspire us to look at the world and others with more humanity, with compassion, and above all, with the sensitivity to truly see those around us.